Hi there, my name is Brian Harrison and I am a Cloud Solution Architect with Microsoft, and this is the Azure 101 series. In this particular video we're going to be continuing to focus on networking services, and specifically we're going to focus on user-defined routing and network security groups, which will allow you to both control and secure traffic within the scope of your virtual network. So with that, let's head on over to the portal. And we're going to take a look first at the virtual network itself, because both user-defined routes and network security groups are directly applied and assigned to pieces of the virtual network, specifically the subnets, or in the case of network security groups, they might also be applied to devices within the scope of your virtual network, and we'll be talking about that in a future video. Now, there are a couple of different ways to create your user-defined routes and network security groups. The first and most common way to create any resource is through the Create a Resource button. But to show you that, we open up the All Services, which of course provides us access to everything. And you will see here when I click Route that there is a value here for route tables, so that we can actually look specifically at an individual route table itself rather than having to go through the virtual network. But I'm going to show you the way that it is integrated with the virtual network here. In the same way that we can do that with a route table, we can do the exact same thing with network security groups, which you can see here. As I mentioned, both of these things can be gotten to directly as individual resources, as they are managed separately within the scope of Azure, but they are directly tied to your virtual network. So under our virtual network here, we have our Azure 101 VNet, which of course I spelled incorrectly, but it is still going to be able to be used for demonstration purposes. Now, you won't see anything in here on this navigation area for route tables or network security groups. And that's because neither one of them are directly tied to the virtual network itself. They're actually tied to the subnet, which is considered a sub-resource of the virtual network. So if we go under our subnets here and dive into our default subnet, you will now see network security group option, route table option. This is where we can now assign existing resources to this area. So if we click on network security group, you'll see here that I can assign either none, or I can actually choose one that is existing. Now, if I want to create a new one, I am going to actually have to go out and do that separately within the scope of the portal. In your CLI or PowerShell, that's not going to be necessary. In the route table, much the same thing. We have none, or if I had any existing. So let's go back to our all services, and we'll start with the route table first. We'll go to our route tables, and of course we see that we have none. So let's go ahead and create a new one and see exactly what the requirements are here. So I'm going to call this the Azure 101 default route, specifically for the default subnet. I'm then going to choose the resource group that VNet is in, and I'm going to set the location of Central US, as that is where the virtual network is currently placed. So we'll go ahead and click Create. And as soon as that's done, we can now actually go to the specific resource. Okay, we're going to go to our resource. And this is just an overview. Now, the first thing that you'll see here in the overview section is a list of routes that have been applied to this route table. There is a limit on it, and I believe it's 400 routes per individual route table. And I believe there's also a number of routes that can be applied to a specific subscription, as well as to a virtual network. 400, though, is usually the number that is most relevant for most customers, as that is your total number or maximum number for a given route table. The next thing is the subnet or subnets that this particular route table has been applied to. So this is the reverse side of what we saw in the virtual network. So if we go under routes first, we will click add, and this is where we specify a route. We're going to give the route name of default. We're going to specify the same route prefix as what's in the default subnet. We're going to then choose what the next hop type is. So if you'll remember in reading the blog post, the most common use case that I see is doing a next hop from, say, a load balancer, a public-facing load balancer in your virtual network to a virtual appliance such as an intrusion detection, intrusion prevention device, or maybe a packet scanning device, something along those lines, and have the traffic flow through there before being sent to an actual application server or web server. And that, of course, is for security purposes. In this particular case, what we're going to do, though, is it's going to be a virtual network. Now, the virtual network gateway hop type is if you're going to be sending traffic back on-prem through a VPN gateway. If you want to keep the traffic, as I described in my use case, in the virtual network, we'll, of course, use the virtual network. But if we want to send it to the internet, or we want to send it to a virtual appliance, or we just want to trap it, then we can specify as none. So I'm going to specify virtual network, and then I'm going to specify a next hop address. And I would go ahead and click OK. So I'll go ahead and do that here. We're now adding a route to this particular route table. Now, as I mentioned, I can actually go in here and add this route table to the default subnet of the virtual network. I've successfully added my route. I will do a quick refresh so that you can actually see that it was there. And there we have our default route. Now, I'm going to show you the reverse side of what I showed you a little while ago, where we want to now associate this with that default subnet in the virtual network. I must have chosen a wrong region for this particular route. It is, of course, specific to the region, so if you're virtual networking your router in two different places, that's not going to actually work. They do absolutely need to be in the same region, and I must have chosen the wrong region for where the route is versus where my virtual network is. But you get the idea. This is, of course, where I would associate that. Now let's go back and take a look at network security groups. Let's first of all go into all services, and we will select network security and go to network security groups. In this particular case, I do already have one created. This is for a specific VM that I created earlier. This one is tied directly to the VM rather than to the subnet. I now want to create a separate one that's specific to the subnet. So for example, in my blog post, I talked about being able to layer your firewall rules, where maybe your subnet rules are a little bit more open, and then you can lock them down on a per VM basis based on the way that that VM is going to be used or the type of traffic that's going to be flowing in and out of it. So in this particular VM instance, I actually opened up port 22 because I want to be able to SSH into that particular box. But in the subnet, maybe I'm locking down all ports other than 22 across, or maybe I've opened up additional ports across the entire subnet, whereas 22 is only going to be open for this particular VM, things along those lines. So let's create a new network security group for that default subnet. Once again, we will call it default NSG. And we will specify, of course, the resource group, and I will specify East US 2 because I think that that's where that particular VNet has been placed. You'll notice it doesn't allow me to go ahead and create any rules by default. There are default rules applied to every single network security group as soon as it has been created. I'll show that to you. Those are set at a very, very low priority level so that you do have the ability to override them. But they are applied to every network security group, and you do need to be aware that they are there, because if you don't override them, then they will absolutely, of course, be applied to your subnets or your NIC cards. Okay, let's go to our resource. And here are all of those default rules. So on the overview page, you're going to see all of the inbound and outbound security rules that have been applied to your network security group. Because I haven't created any new ones, you will see, of course, all of the existing ones. And you'll see that the priority numbers are very, very high. Therefore, you have the ability to override them by creating a rule that has a much lower priority number, thereby getting applied first when traffic flows in or out of your particular device. So let's create a new inbound security rule. And we're going to create one that actually you have a deny all inbound. I want to actually open up inbound traffic for port 80 and port 443 into this particular subnet. I have a web application that I need to do that. Now, typically what you're going to do is you're going to pick a source, which you can either pick a IP address range. You can pick a service tag, which a service tag is something that we apply for you or that we provide to you. It basically defines a IP address range for certain types of services inside of Azure. So a service tag might be a source of one of our PaaS services, such as a database, or Azure, just the Azure Cloud as a whole, or maybe Azure Traffic Manager. Those are typically PaaS services. They have outbound connection or public IP endpoints, so they are considered to be internet facing, and therefore the traffic would be coming from the internet before making it to your specific subnet. You can also, of course, pick a number of others. Maybe the traffic's coming from a specific storage account, a specific SQL environment, Key Vault, or Cosmos DB, Event Hub, Service Bus. This list is very, very long, and it is continuing to grow. Now, if you need to create your own service tag where maybe you want to group a set of servers together that might be sending traffic to your subnet or to your device, then you can use what's called an application security group, where you create a name, you apply that name to a set of devices that are maybe of the same tier in your application, are always going to be sending traffic. Therefore, you don't have to necessarily know the IP address range. You can just specify the application security group, thereby allowing for dynamic IP addressing where possible. And this works really, really well when using any kind of auto-scaling environment where you don't know necessarily how many servers are going to be actually a part of that application security group. Now, in this particular case, I'm going to specify the source as being a service tag with internet. So this is all outbound traffic. We're going to leave the source port ranges as being open. That's usually the best way, because you cannot always guarantee that someone's going to be sending data to port 80 and 443 from port 80 and 443. That typically is what happens, but you're not always sure. So we leave that kind of open. Then we specify our destination as an IP address range, and we're going to use the subnet address range of 10.0.0.0.24, because that was the default subnet range, and then we're going to specify a destination port range. Now in this case, I need one for port 80. I also need one for port 443. So I'm going to do this one for port 443. You then specify, is it a TCP or UDP protocol? This is absolutely going to be TCP because it's going to be HTTPS. And then do we want to allow or deny? And then specify the priority number. Now, by me specifying a priority number of 100, even though all inbound traffic has been denied via the default route or the default security rule here, I am now giving something of a higher priority and saying open up for this particular port. So this one will absolutely take control. However, I'm only opening port 443, therefore the rest of the ports in the range will absolutely be denied because of that default rule. And I'll show that to you in a second after I give this a name, because the network security group allows me to see the effective rules that have been applied because of this NSG. So let me go ahead and create that new rule. And by the way, this rule creation process is exactly the same for inbound as it is for outbound. I just wanted to walk you through it at least one time. So we've now got our new rule that you can see there, but this doesn't allow me to see the effective rule. So hopefully this gives you a decent understanding of user-defined routes, network security groups, and how you might want to use them. Please feel free to ask any questions, but also take a look at any documentation out there, because there is definitely more depth available.